All right, welcome everybody. Today's October 3rd. It's 2024 and we're in, I've lost count, 203rd, 204th session. I should start putting it in the slides. Today we're doing a core topic for the IC topic chat. So a core topic is one of those topics we do every year. So if you go back to I don't know, it was October 2nd or October 1st last year, whatever that Thursday was, you'll find it was contracting. It's always that we do the core topics first session of the month when possible. And we do different things on the core topics, such as how to set your fees and why be an independent consultant and where to set up your shop, what kind of office do you have? And contracting is a good one to do in October, I think, because if you're like me and you're working on kind of a federal contracts, a lot of things just got awarded in September and October, and here we are trying to figure out how to connect with our brand new clients or our new contracts with our existing clients. And so I like this one, but so I think everybody knows who I'm. Matt Feldmann with Goshen Consulting. Victoria, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thanks for inviting me. Victoria Straub. I'm with Spec Associates. I've been happily working with Melanie Wallach at Spec for over 25 years now. And yeah. And we have one other employee, just to give you context for our contracts. We currently have one other employee. We also use subcontractors for extra hands, for specialty skills, and for content expertise as needed for different contracts. Our contracts range from anywhere to 4 to 7 figures. And 80% of the time, we use our own contract format versus the clients. And we have about 3 different types of contracts we use. I know today we'll be talking about the client contract, but we also utilize a lot subcontractor agreement as well as a MOU for proposal writing. With that, we'll go to the disclaimer for today.
All right, so disclaimer, we are not lawyers, everybody. This shouldn't come as a surprise to you. We're going to present you our perspectives because we've been around trying to do this and it seems to have worked for us and we know maybe more than most, but we are not lawyers. What I'm going to encourage you to do is take what we teach you today and put that out there to your lawyer and say, what do I need to know? How can you help me out? Maybe we're helping you figure out a little bit more, but don't take what we do and just go start writing contracts without willy-nilly. I would say we're helping you understand what you should know before you walk into your own lawyer's office who's going to help you with it. I'm going to go to the next slide. While you're doing that, I'm going to walk down the hall, Victoria, because I think I've got some background noise that may be a little bit loud. So,
okay,
go ahead.
Sure. So we want to just stress the importance of contracts. And, in a nutshell, the contract is to provide the details to have a healthy relationship and define that relationship with your client. It is really about financial and legal protections. So we have here just a couple of different details related to what I just said. In terms of it defines the expectations, clarifies your relationship, protects you for litigation purposes, establishes you as a contractor, and then other details like start and end dates, and provides a reference for scope creep, where then you can negotiate for amendments if the client is willing to pay more for more services.
And I think the key thing here for me is it's identifying and communicates expectations across different folks working with. It's a communication tool. And the contract lays it all out for everybody to understand what's going on. And it is a reference point, particularly if you get to that point of scope creep, where you think maybe you're at scope creep, or if you're in a situation where somebody is like we're in right now. We have a client who just said, well, our funder just said they don't have no more money for us. So the contract's completed, but we've been working for the past 3 years. well, we're going back to the contract because I think even if you've run out of money, you still owe us something because you didn't cancel the contract. So anyway, that's why you have this contract in place so that you don't have a situation and you have a place to reference when you get into this kind of sticky situation like we just found ourselves in.
Exactly. So at this point, both Matt and I are each going to take turns and just discuss different clauses and maybe some points that you haven't yet considered about them. Maybe you have. And it was interesting in preparing for today's presentation, and Matt and I just even talking about different situations, and even if you put our contracts side by side, you'll see that there's a lot of similarity in terms of the concepts that are covered, but the way that they're languaged and so forth can be very different. And it not, one's not right or wrong, but I think that the point is to make sure you have yourself covered in some language for a lot of the different areas that you'll be seeing today. And you'll notice that specs contracts seem to be written very plainly. But I assure you, we did have our legal counsel look at it. So, all right. So the first area that I wanted to talk about is the compensation clause. And now there's some text that is not showing up here. But what I want to say about the compensation clause is, talking about the different types of payment structures that you might have. The top 3 types of payment structures that we encounter in our contracts, and it's really usually client driven on how they want it. But if we have our own decision to be made, we would probably in most of our types of contracts do a fixed regular schedule. The last example in this slide. But the other types that we encounter most prominently are hourly with a cap on the total number of hours, billed frequently, usually monthly, and then also a by deliverable or milestone. We have one client that always wants it in that way. So from our perspective, the major pro for an hourly is that it's great for cash flow. Same thing with the regular fixed schedule. That too for us is great for cash flow. And the primary thing about the compensation clause for us is to make sure that we have good cash flow and at the same time cover ourselves for any risks. A pro for the second example here, the doing deliverable by deliverable and milestone is, and this also applies to the fixed regular schedule, that if you're efficient, you can make a profit from the unused dollars in those 2 situations. The con on the by deliverable method of compensation is that if it's a type of work where there's few deliverables or milestones, it's not a great one for the cash flow situation. I have a couple of notes here, and this relates to Matt's situation that he shared with us, is that you want to make sure that in your termination clause, you pair up, if you have a by deliverable milestone or a fixed regular schedule milestone, or I guess this might apply to hourly with cap, but not so much, that you make sure in your termination clause that it says that you will submit your final bill for hours used that had not been billed yet. And it could be that, or the tip on the deliverable milestone is to just be mindful up front when you're designing that dollar amount, is to, try to, as closely as you can, approximate the value for that, to make sure your spending does not differ too much from what's billed by that time, if in the case that there is early termination. I have heard of another subcontractor get caught in that situation, where the time, or the client, they submitted their first deliverable, and the client thought it was so good that they ended up not wanting the rest of their services. And that deliverable amount of money didn't really match all that had been put into that service. And the contractor kind of lost out on that one.
Quick question for you, Victoria.
Yes.
Have you ever had a situation where you're working on a deliverable or a milestone basis, and you have done all your work, or most of your work, but you haven't gotten to the point of completing the deliverable because the client has like forgotten to give you the data, or they needed to do a thing, and so you found yourself in a situation where you were expecting to get paid, but you haven't been paid now because they're dragging their feet on something. I think I heard somebody talking about this recently. Maybe it was on the IC Top chats, where they found themselves unable to bill their last piece, and they lost out on a significant amount. And it was not for lack of something that not for something that they did. It was because of something the client didn't get around to doing, and so they never completed their deliverable and never got paid.
We got tied up in that situation once, where we didn't get a payment for a final deliverable. It started out as an hourly contract, and then they wanted an amendment for the final deliverable, because we were that said that there would be a lump sum final payment once that deliverable was handed to them. And we had already done the work, but I don't remember the details at that point of us doing the amendment exactly, but we ended up not being able to submit the final deliverable because the final deliverable was a manuscript or an article to be published. And the part of the client's work was to do the lit review for it. And they didn't, I forget it was a long time ago. They either didn't do it very well, and we didn't want our name, or it needed to be, more work needed to be done. And Melanie, I don't know if you remember the details, but we ended up.
Sadly, yes.
Pardon me?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah. Am I saying it right?
Because if we wanted to finish, we would have had to do the lit review, which is a huge task, right? So where's your choice? Do you either not take the rest of the money or go over budget by doing the work that they should have done?
Yeah, so we made the decision to let it be, because we had already overextended ourselves on that project. So, but yeah, lessons learned on that, when it relies on the client's work as well to somehow language it. I still haven't come up with how I would change the contract in that situation.
Yeah, I think when we get into the discussion piece, that's something I want to encourage everybody, and start thinking about it now. Maybe write down something in your notes to tell us some of the lessons you've learned, because I mean, this week alone, we're learning a brand new lesson with regards to a long-standing client who's been wonderful, but kind of just blanked out on us. All right, I'm sorry. So go right ahead. Oh, one other thing. Have you ever been on a oh, I just had it. And we've set up our contracts like this before. It's where they pay you a flat amount, kind of like a lawyer, and they say, "We'll use your services as needed," and then we'll not contingency. What's the term? But retainer. Thank you. That's the term I was looking for. Have you been on a retainer basis? Have you done that before?
We've been paid a whole year up front with two different clients.
Oh, I love those too. Those are great.
Is that exactly what you mean, or not, or is that different?
So we had before where we had an organization that said, we definitely want to retain you. So that's why it's called a retainer.
Mm,
But we're not exactly sure what we want you to do yet, but we know
Mhm.
we're going to use you. So we set up a contract for a flat amount, and then we would report back to
Mm.
them on the number of hours worked. And then once we hit a certain amount, then they would give us another flat amount. And that worked out. That was a pretty, it was a good contract. It was a terrible client, but it was a good contract. I like the way the contract was set up. I'd like to do more of those, but the client didn't work out as well as we'd like.
Yeah, that sounds profitable too in that
Can be.
situation, because you're getting paid for your.
Yeah, I used to work in kind of the finance piece at universities, and I was never really a finance person, but I'd hung around with the college and university business officers. And I remember one guy who was always talking about getting the cash and holding onto the cash, and how important it is to, and it's true with, you want a cash flush organization where you get retained funds as hold on to them for as long as possible, because it gives you kind of the capacity to do more. So
Mhm,
when possible, I like people to pay me up front if that's possible.
mhm. Yeah, or a contract signing payment as well, just to kick it off. Yeah.
It's a good idea.
So the next clause that I'm just wanted to touch on is related to what we were just talking about, and using a termination clause to ensure you get reimbursed for all of your work and expenses already paid or committed. So this is an example of that clause for how we use it, and this would be where in this situation that there's a cap each year, like it was a federal grant, there's a cap each year, and we had a fixed schedule payment structure. So we wanted to cover ourselves for if it was an early termination, to be able to send a final invoice. And if we were underpaid, they would pay us the difference. And if we were overpaid, we would be sending those funds back.
I see termination clauses a lot with, I mean, it's usually a standard piece because you want to know how to, if you need to cancel a contract, how to get out of it. It's very frequent, and I want everybody to pay attention to this piece. Very frequent that a large organization will put in a termination clause, but they'll forget to allow you to terminate the contract with them. And so I very frequently will read a handful of sections in a contract. Some of it seems pretty normal and boring, but termination clauses are important because if it says, like the university gives you a contract, if it says the university can cancel a contract with 45 days or 30 days or whatever they put in there, that's fine. But they also need to give you the same right to terminate the contract with them, because this is a two-way street. This isn't a one-way street. And so we're both engaging in this contract. It's not fair for them to say they can terminate with you, but you can't terminate with them.
It's a
So
great point, Matt. Have you ever terminated a client?
yes. And I've had contracts terminated on us as well. Obviously, in the middle of one. We're in the middle of one this week. So yes, I've had to terminate with clients. But it's usually, you know, when I terminate, it's usually kind of amenable, or there's something not happening. And we've threatened a couple of times when things are just not going up to our expectations.
Yeah, you have to be able to do your work. All right. So the third clause that I'll go over before Matt shares some of his, some other clauses, is regarding the intellectual property clause. Now, when, we see an intellectual property clause on a client's contract, it's very long and a lot of legalese. But on our contract, we are keeping it simple, and we are of the mindset to use this verbiage, which basically says that there's going to be joint copyright for any instruments or constructs that are developed. But the client certainly owns their reports, their data. But we want to make the distinction that when we're developing instrument, or primarily it's about instruments for us, that we bring an accumulation of knowledge that we can't unlearn from our prior paid work. And the current client is benefiting from that. And so we use this joint copyright aspect or in this clause. And I don't think we've ever received any pushback, and we'll actually, when it is a client contract, ask them to insert this second paragraph, and they have done that for us. Now, I don't think it would necessarily work for all types of projects and all clients, but I would just invite you to consider it if you think it applies to you and would work. Now, Matt, I think that you indicated that a lot of your clients are, did you say, are universities?
A lot of universities, we often find that the universities, and the way we set it up is everything that we create is effectively their intellectual property. We're operating for them. But I think that that's really interesting. And I know we've had this conversation about the intellectual property piece, that perhaps anything that we're creating that's not necessarily the final product, but it's our instruments, we should have access to, and they shouldn't be able to claim ownership of. And I think that this is a good clause. I might want to think about incorporating this.
So I'm at this point going to pull up Matt's a blank contract from Matt's organization for him to go over some aspects from that. One moment.
I'm going to pull mine up. I've got it right here.
Oh, okay, great. Let me undo my share.
Okay, so here it is. Should be looking at my contract. So we've got it set up. Now, you're either going to find that you're in a situation where you're either getting a contract from another individual, like these big organizations like the University of Illinois or Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, that they are giving you, that's some two clients that we might work with locally where I am. They are going to insist on using their contract and their system. But probably about 60 or 70% of the time, people will not have contracts in place. And
Yeah.
sorry, I'm in a public space. It's hard for me. Anyway, with regards to the contracts, I oftentimes will send my contract to the client. So I'm just going to walk everybody through the contract that I use when I'm working with other folks. This has been something that I adopted from one of our peers, and I've had it checked out by my small business lawyer. I'm happy to share it with anybody, but please just, I'm going to make anybody who wants to see this promise that they won't use it just exactly the way you're seeing it. They need to take it to a lawyer if they want to take a look at it. But anyway, we start off with kind of the recitals of who we are and what kind of service that I'm a I'm a company that provides services to clients, and there's a client that we're working with, and they will be named up here in the intro paragraph. Talk generally about services. We talk generally about compensation. When we talk about expenses, these are kind of just, I don't even read these contracts very often. I don't even think much about it. Here's our term and termination contracts. How you go about terminating. This is an important piece, and I think that I know Becky will probably have something to say about this at some point when we talk about our independent contractor status. That frequently we need to demonstrate that we are not employees. And so I go ahead and put this in here so they can see that we are in fact independent, that we end up sharing our 1099 with people, so our W-9, so that we can be identified as a 1099 employee, and that we intend to pay employment taxes and benefits, that's what you're seeing here. We also will be required at some point to say we have workers' compensation, and that we will provide workers' compensation for our folks. Here's our intellectual property paragraph. And yet, I'm going to be honest, every one of these paragraphs, we could spend the entire session going through. Intellectual property in and of itself could be probably its own workshop series. So I'm not going to go into it, but there's a lot to be thought about here. Generally, we say we're going to develop a scope of work. The end product is our client's work. I'm not going to spend any time on representations and warranties, but basically this says we're going to stand by our work. And then this is forever a problem with all of my contracts. There's always numbering that gets out of place. We're going to hold the company harmless from, and we're going to ask them to hold us harmless from any damages that may be outside of anything direct within this contract. And then we also have a confidentiality section about how we hold each other's information confidential. Sorry, guys. This is always the quietest hallway. I never have a problem with people talking in the background. I've got to go find a quieter space. In the middle of like a loud space. Non-solicitation. This is critically important here. Because in the non-solicitation, we're basically saying we're not going to recruit your employees away from your organization, and your organization isn't going to try and recruit our folks. And this is super important because I don't want to lose my staff to a university that says, oh, hey, look, Joe's fantastic at this work. We want to recruit Joe away from Goshen Consulting and bring him to work at our university. So there's a lot in here about what happens if they choose to do that, and it's going to be expensive for them to do that. But we provide that same thing to them. We also say that they can't reassign us to another organization without doing anything. They usually have this assignment situation too internally. Well, they'll have an assignment to us, so we can't just like go off and assign our project to another consultant without going through them. So I swear I've been in this hallway so many times, never been a problem with noise in the background, and like completely pin dropped for hours. And today everybody's standing next to me with calls and stuff like that. Anyway, we're back on it. Critical piece, every contract you see is always going to have the notices. So you'll say, how do you get in contact with the different folks? And how do you communicate with one another? So they're going to put their information, including their address, their phone number, their email address here. This is severability. Where are we going to fight this in court? As you'll see here, let's see, I can't see the whole thing. In the event, we're going to sever this contract, we're gonna use a competent, you'll see this oftentimes, they'll say, we don't want this to go to court. I've seen this with, client contracts, it says this will go to arbitration before it goes to a court. We're not gonna get to that point, but one of the things you'll often see here, and I'll also point this out, I always put this in here, that I want it in Illinois, in my county. Now, this is usually something a lawyer is gonna look at and they're gonna strike right away, because they want it in their jurisdiction. Now, the way I usually play this game is if I'm paying them for something, I'm going to insist on it being in my county because I'm the one with the money giving it to you. And we have the situation with some of our contracts. Usually I'm on the receiving end, and if they're insisting on it being in their county and they're paying me, I say fine, because it's got to go somewhere. And hypothetically, we're never going to get to that point, but this is not something I'm going to fight. If they're paying me, but if I'm paying for a service, I insist on it in my county. This is actually where we put in our evaluation plan in the scope of work section. And this will typically, it's exactly like what we put in our NSF proposal or whatever we put in for our evaluation section. We're asking for what we're charging for. You see a start and end date. And this is actually really important because typically our contracts, we invoice on a quarterly basis. And that quarterly basis, we lay it all out here. On April 1st, we're going to invoice this amount. On July 1st, we're going to invoice this amount. We'll do it with columns and rows where you'll see January, April, July, October typically, and then across the top you'll see the years, where you'll see 2024, 2025, 2026, and then it all adds up to the total that we asked for, that which is all put in the evaluation budget narrative. And then we have a basic acceptance, and I do want to point this out here. This is an interesting little clause that I learned about from I don't know, one of the books that I read about how to become a consultant. But I put this little thing in here that says, alternatively, your payment indicates full acceptance and also will signify your approval to. And why do I put that? Usually, nobody will take us up on this. But if I give them an invoice and a contract at the same time, and they want to just get us going, sometimes it's easier for people to pay us than it is to get a contract signed by all their series. And for whatever reason this makes sense, this is probably not a good organization to work with generally, because they're disorganized internally. But you're oftentimes working with these big organizations and they don't know how to get anything done with contracts, but they know how to get something paid. So they can oftentimes pay us to get us going. And so I don't know, I've never gone back to try and test this through any legal means, but we will oftentimes say, just go ahead and pay us and we'll start working. But we have this little sentence that we've put in there. So it does hypothetically mean that they've approved us to get working because they've paid us. Then signatures, and we'll have them for their signature, put all the information here, and that's it. That's the whole kind of rundown of our contracts. Again, this is my version, and it seems like the contracts are like fingerprints. Everybody's is a little bit different for various reasons. And before I go further, I want to invite Emily Johnson, who does not expect to come on today, to talk about some of the things that she's added to contracts. Emily is our office manager, and she's actually in the middle of several contracts right now, supporting our folks at Goshen. And so, Emily, did you want to share some of the thoughts that you have about things that you've placed in here? Because I know there are things that we're adding now, particularly within the scope of work, that has been very helpful and also informative for our clients that end up having trouble down the road.
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So yeah, I have added a couple of phrases, specifically in the scope of work, and under we have a Goshen Consulting section that just kind of lays out, this is kind of what we're about. This is the kind of projects that we've done. And my coworker and I kind of came up with a phrase that's like, we abide by these sorts of, we get city training, and I can't remember exactly what all is in that paragraph, but we follow the evaluation principles set out in the American Evaluation Association, and just kind of different things that would kind of cover us as far as data security goes. And then another thing that we also added too, and I saw this in the comments, was a phrase about if payment is late. So we usually expect payment after 30 days. If payment is 60 days late, we're going to stop work. We're going to put a hold on work being done. And I did see a comment about that. So we do have that as a new thing in our contracts, that work will pause until we receive payment. Matt, were there any other questions that you had about other parts? There was something we put in about travel expenses, so that if travel's not anticipated, we don't expect this, but if it's requested, then we'll bill travel expenses as incurred. I can't remember if there's anything specific else that you're thinking about.
We started putting like a penalty, and we put in 5% per month, which, by the way, we've never charged anybody a late penalty, even if they've been very late. It's mostly just a veiled threat to get people to kind of get their job done on their end with contracting and invoicing. Because frankly, they oftentimes some of our principal investigators have no idea how anything operates at their university until they get this contract, and they're learning on the fly. And frankly, we're not a high priority for them sometimes because we're just the evaluators. It's kind of a sad situation, but it's a reality. Anyway, we put in this 5% per month. And we found that, at least in certain states, that's not. Lawyers came back and said it's fine for you to put something in there, and they told us it's 1.5% per month. And so I don't know if anybody has any advice on that. Because the corporate lawyers at the universities wouldn't allow that, but they allowed something to be placed in there to kind of encourage, well, their people to go through and get things processed. So 1.5% per month seems to be the running number.
And I do think that we did add something in the scope of work too about project reporting, that if the project team lapses its communication with us and does not provide the necessary and requested data, this may result in incomplete annual or mid-year evaluative reports. So that was also added recently too.
For sure. I'm recognizing now we're at 11:47 my time. So let's go on back into the slides and do our last 5.5 suggestions for contracting, and then we can spend the rest of the time kind of talking about certainly all the comments that I'm seeing here. So advice for contracts: try not to work until the contract is finalized. I say try not to because I think it's pretty a reality that we find out that an organization has been funded. Like this week, we found out a group had gotten funded, and we were funded along with them, I guess, starting, October 1st. It was October 2nd, it was yesterday when we found out. And I'm thinking, it would have been nice to know a month ago when you found out, but okay. So we will get started on helping them out with doing their work, doing our evaluation work before the contract is finalized. But try not to do that. Just try and keep that to a limit. Go ahead to the next one. Start early with your contracting. As soon as you know that they're committed to you and you're committed to them, start putting something in place. Oftentimes, it may even make sense to put together an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, that you can sign. That's not a real, formal contract that just says we're going to start working, and the contract needs to go through all these channels. It's going to go through legal and all these things, but we just need something in place to know that you'll honor us in our work. Go ahead. Don't forget your intellectual property. This was in here long before Victoria included her piece. But you may be creating final products for them, but the process may be your own. And use your standard operating procedures or your boilerplate. And remember, you can always request changes to your client's boilerplate, especially insurance requirements. We didn't talk too terribly about this, but that's the other piece that I'm always going into and always looking very carefully at. their insurance requirements, because oftentimes it'll be this extreme amount that even is more than what we provide. So typically, a lot of us find out we need professional liability insurance when we get this one contract that says you need to have professional liability at such and such a level. But sometimes it's an extreme amount. It's like maybe $3 million, which is, I think the typical going is like $1 million. $3 million is extreme for what we're going to do. Even in the worst case scenario, I can't imagine why anybody would have $3 million, even more than $1 million worth of damages because of an evaluation contract. So you can ask for changes to those things, and they are usually pretty amenable to those changes. The other thing that you'll also often see is if you're a one-person operation, you do not need to provide insurance for workers' compensation for people who may become injured on the job. If you don't have anybody, because if you get injured on the job, you can't sue yourself. You would take care of yourself. So you can't have workers' compensation insurance. So you need to make sure that's stricken from those contracts. All right, so going forward, let's talk about our next sessions that are coming up, which is on the next slide. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Did you want to talk about Gail and this wonderful chapter?
Yeah, I know that you had suggested that we include this, and I think it's a great tool of Gail Barrington's book. There's a chapter referencing contracts. I really don't have more on that, and I know we are limited on time, so look it up.
Yeah, if you guys want to, this is Gail, originally did the pre-conference workshops, and I think that this is a great chapter, or chapter 16, page 202, if you get a copy of this book.
Okay.
And then next slide. Next slide. Oh, there we go. Upcoming sessions. Claire Stoshek, who's here, is going to talk next week. Thank you for that. Oh, look, she just put some stuff there. ICTIC session where I saw Naima is here. Naima and I think some other of the TIG leaders are going to join us in 2 weeks. And then in 3 weeks, I hope we're all seeing each other and we're all hanging out together in Portland. I'll be there. And then in 4 weeks, I'm going to do a Halloween special. It'll be spooktacular, I promise. With that, Victoria, say goodbye. Say goodbye to you two people. Everybody sit around, okay?
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
Yep.
And let's have a few minutes of chat.